You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Feel like who art ed?
Try to slice it.
Who art ed? Mr. Wood art ed me.
Good. Either way, it's ambiguous. It works on so many levels.
I know.
That's off to a great start.
Welcome to Who Arted, weekly art history for all ages. I'm your host, Kyle Wood, and today we're looking at Fernand Léger. Fernand Léger was born on February 4th, 1881, in Argentan, a small town in the Normandy region of France. While he's remembered for work that was distinctly modern and industrial, he grew up in a rural family raising cattle. Léger showed an early interest in design and structure. From 1897 to 99, he apprenticed in an architect's office in the nearby city of Caen. In 1900, he moved to Paris, and initially he worked as an architectural draftsman and later did photographic retouching. In 1903, Léger enrolled at the Paris School of Decorative Arts. Although he was rejected from the prestigious École des Beaux-Arts, he was so determined he actually attended classes there as an unofficial pupil under two of its professors. During this early phase in his career, his paintings were basically a mix of Impressionist and Fauvist styles, focusing on light and vibrant colors. Then, in 1907, he went to a Cézanne retrospective at the Salon des Automnes. Cézanne's geometric approach to form and his famous advice to treat nature in terms of the cylinder, the sphere, and the cone really just clicked with Léger. In 1908, he moved his studio to La Ruche, which translates to the beehive. It was sort of a famous area where a lot of artists were hanging out on the edge of Montparnasse in Paris. This is where Léger became associated with the Cubist movement. While Picasso and Braque were developing Cubism, fracturing subjects into flat, intersecting planes, Léger took a slightly different approach. He studied the subjects and simplified them, but he painted them with shading that gave his work these three-dimensional tubular forms, leading critics to refer to his style as Tubism. In 1913, Léger pushed his style even further with a series of abstract studies he titled Contrast of Forms. He had this idea that the strongest pictorial effects could come from the juxtaposition or side-by-side placement of opposing elements, curved lines against straight ones, flat planes against solid volumes, and bright, contrasting colors. He famously compared the sort of jarring visual impact of his paintings to the appearance of billboards in a landscape, embracing the aesthetics of modern popular culture. During World War I, Léger was drafted in the French army, and he served in the engineering corps. Serving along ordinary working-class men really shifted his perspective on art. It left him wanting to make his art accessible to the general public and not just the elites who you traditionally think of in the gallery world. During the war, Léger survived a mustard gas attack at the Battle of Verdun, which led to a long hospitalization before he was released from the army in 1917. But his time and his service in the war really had a lasting impact. He later recalled being dazzled by the sunlight gleaming off the bare metal breech of a 75mm artillery piece. He described being struck by the beauty of machinery as a total revolution inside of him as a painter. This marked the beginning of his famous mechanical period. Throughout the 1920s, Léger was fascinated with machinery of the modern city, motors, gears, factory interiors, and railway crossings. He began painting people as mechanized geometric figures, perfectly integrated into an equally geometric urban environment. When World War II broke out, Léger, like a lot of prominent modern artists, relocated to the US, where his reputation had already been established by a major 1935 retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art. He spent the war years teaching and continuing to refine his style, taking inspiration from the industrial landscape of the US. After the war, he returned to France, where he continued to push himself, making murals, stained glass, and mosaics until he passed away in 1955. Now, I always feel like the best way to really know an artist is by looking at their work, and that's why every episode features a little bit of talk of a specific piece. Today, I want to focus on one of my favorites by Léger, a composition in blue created between 1921 and 27. I like this one partly because it's a great example of the mechanical period and that sort of Tubist style that was similar to Picasso's Cubism, but not quite the same. Also, I've seen this painting like a million times because it's at the Art Institute of Chicago, and let's face it, familiarity just makes it more comfortable and pleasant to look at least for me. What I really like about composition in blue is it's just so perfect for studying principles of design. As you look over the composition, there are just so many things he did to make it a visually satisfying work. The monochromatic color scheme gives it unity. We see little dots, squares, and rectangles repeated in different parts of the canvas. The lines lead your eye in different directions, and there are different weights of lines, some thicker, some thinner, to create a variety. It's mostly hard-edged and geometric with a lot of straight lines, but just enough curves to make it feel softer and more approachable. The gradients across the shapes in the middle of the composition give them a rounded, tubular form to stand out from the flat shapes that surround them and recede into the background. A little fun fact about this painting was recently discovered by conservationists at the Art Institute. I want to say around like 2022 or so. Under the surface layers, the oil paint, Léger laid down a numbered and lettered grid to map out the design. And I think this is just like a perfect example of how an artist's background comes out in their working and their methodology. I mean, he started off as an architectural draftsman and serving in the engineering corps, and then he takes this almost mathematical approach to planning the canvas. As I've said so many times on the show, I am not the kind of person for whom art really makes sense intuitively. I've learned a lot from reading, listening to others, and thinking about how design principles can be applied to the work. I love a piece like this because it feels like there's a system and a structure that I can study and make sense of. For me, that's what the best modern abstraction was all about. Thinking carefully and deliberately arranging the elements in a way that's visually appealing and engaging regardless of the subject. Representational work is always tied to specific people, places, and things in a certain moment of time. It's an artifact of a culture, and while that can be wonderful and give us windows into other people's lived experiences, representational work also just by default comes with all sorts of baggage based on the audience's connections to the subject. Léger's composition in blue and similar modern abstract paintings tried to become more universal by removing the details that would tie it to a specific subject. He allows us to appreciate more pure aesthetics and just the pleasing harmonies of lines, shapes, and values, the balance of the composition, and the leading lines that create pathways gently guiding our eye in a meandering path around the canvas. Now, while I see this as primarily about the composition, it's not strictly a non-objective work. There are other ideas expressed in the painting. I would say it shows Léger's optimism about the machine age. While many artists and writers of the early 20th century feared industrialization was destroying humanity, and you saw backlashes of sorts in the arts and crafts movement and Art Nouveau, which really focused a lot more on the natural and organic as well as the human touch, Léger saw a kind of beauty in the industrial landscape. The mechanical elements in the painting aren't meant to be threatening or alienating. They're presented as harmonious, and by creating paintings that resembled something manufactured or machine parts, Léger was trying to make his art more accessible and relatable to everyone. He wanted to create a style that spoke to the factory worker just as much as it did to the wealthy art collector in the gallery. This concludes this week's episode of Who Arted, part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. If you found this tolerable, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find images of the work being discussed this week and every week on social media at Who Arted Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and of course on the website whoartedpodcast.com. Podcast done.